What's going on, everyone? Welcome to Mission to Medicine. My name is Meharry. Today, we have a very special interview. We have no other than the Honorable James E.K. Hildreth, the president of Meharry Medical College. Oftentimes, we know when we come into Meharry, we learn so much about the school, the history, but we don't know so much about the leaders. So today, we want to dive deep into Dr. Hildreth's history, his beginnings, his journey into medicine, to get to know the man behind the leadership of the institution. Welcome to Mission to Medicine, Dr. Hildreth.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us today. So can you dive a little deep into your background and tell us about where you're from, how you got started?
Sure. So I'm from a small town in Arkansas, Camden. And when I grew up there was probably about 10,000 people, the population. It's one of those towns where when I was growing up, there was a railroad track that separated the black population from the white population. The schools didn't get integrated until I went into high school. It's the first time I went to school with white students. And when I was 11 years old, my father got really sick and died. And even though Camden is the county seat for Washita County, there's a hospital there, my father got very little medical attention. And as an 11-year-old, I did not understand why there's hospitals with doctors in it. Why can't my dad get some medical care? And so I was very, very angry about it. And a short time after that, Martin Luther King was assassinated. He had become my superhero. I listened to his recordings of his speeches, just wanted to kind of be like him. So between my father passing away when I thought he should not have, because doctors and medicine were there, and MLK being assassinated, I was very, very angry. But my mother challenged me that instead of being angry about it, why don't you do something about it? So I decided I'm going to be a doctor so I can make sure no other 11-year-old has to deal with this. And at age 13, I started doing research on physicians and medical school and all that because there were no black physicians in my world to serve as role models. So all I had was the library and books and magazines. And back then, this is like in 69, 70, there were ratings of colleges and universities as to your chances of getting into medical school. And there was one school that was at the top of the top, and that was Harvard. So I decided, since my chances were slim anyway, I better go to Harvard to make sure I have a better chance. And so at age 13, my life's work became getting into Harvard. And I got there and had a great experience and fell in love with research while I was there. And that's kind of how I got started in medicine.
What did you study in undergrad at Harvard?
I majored in organic chemistry.
Oh, wow.
I loved it.
Orgo.
Yeah, once you understood how the electrons flowed and the rules of reactions and all that, it was very conceptually challenging and gratifying for me, and it just seemed to come natural. I loved it.
So I know that's that era of when you went to Harvard, it probably wasn't a lot of people of color there. So how was your experience maneuvering that space back then?
Well, thankfully, when I was at Harvard, I think the total class was 1,600 students, and there were about 120 black students thereabout. And in our dorm, we call them houses. I was in Leverett House. We had something called the Black Table. So when you went into the dining hall to eat and have lunch and all that, there are a few black students that sat with the white students, but the majority of us sat at these two tables on one side of the hall and got to know each other. So we had our own little support group. And I had 6 other students, my road dogs. We sort of bonded as freshmen and went all the way through together. And that made it a great experience. But I have to tell you, during the era that we were at Harvard, the racial climate was not good. And I'll just share one story. My buddy Steve and I, Steve from Sacramento, he's a basketball player, even taller than I am. We went across to the store 24. It's a store that was open 24 hours. We were actually studying for an organic chemistry exam. we decided to go get some munchies, get some stuff to eat, and we came out of the store, and there were 6 or 7 white teenage boys. One had a bat, one had a chain.
Wow.
All of them had something. Their intent was to attack us, right? And just so happens a bus was driving by. The bus driver stopped the bus. He was white. And some of the men on the bus got out and said, "That's not happening tonight." And I often wonder if that bus hadn't stopped and those men hadn't got off the bus, would I even be here to share this story? And some of you may remember that there's a Pulitzer Prize-winning photograph on the front of the Boston Globe showing a black attorney coming out of the City Hall or one of those buildings, and he's holding up his expensive briefcase like this because 3 white teenage boys had taken the flagpole out of its stand. And you could see the flag waving as they're about to pummel him with this flagpole. And that sort of captured the kind of time that was happening when I was at Harvard.
Wow. That's remarkable. That's such a powerful story.
Yeah.
Like, as you said, you might have not have been here today if it wasn't for that bus. So I'm sure that's something that you live with, and that's a story that you tell a lot of people today.
Yes.
I saw that during undergrad, you were working as a carpenter to pay for school.
Yes.
What was that experience like?
So when I was growing up, as my father passed away, I had 4 uncles who were all tradesmen. One was a carpenter, another was a plumber, electrician, and Uncle Joe did all kinds of things. Anyway, they would take me sometimes to the job sites, and I fell in love with the whole idea of taking a big pile of lumber and creating something with it. And so I learned a lot from them. And because I had fallen in love with carpentry, I got pretty good at building things. So when we got our room in Leverett House, my suite mate and I, there was no privacy. So I went to the grounds people and asked them, are there any rules against, building walls and things like that? And they said, as long as you don't penetrate the floor or the ceiling, you do whatever you like. So I designed a wall that, mostly based on friction and just a few nails, was as sturdy as you could imagine, with a door and all that, drywall, painted it up, looked really nice. And so when other students saw that, they engaged me to do the same for them. So I actually did make a few bucks.
Create a business out of it.
Yes.
Okay, entrepreneur.
By building walls to create privacy for some students.
That's awesome. Engineering skills, carpentry skills, all of that right there.
Yes.
How are you able to still build things today? Like, what do you do outside of medicine? Are you still able to carry some of those hobbies over?
Absolutely. So one of my favorite things is I have a workshop in my house that I do carpentry projects. And one of the things that I make cutting boards, I make treasure boxes, I make furniture, things like that.
Oh, wow.
And that's where I kind of get centered, to bring myself back to center. And,
de-stress.
Yeah, exactly.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So, okay, you finished Harvard now, you graduated. What year did you graduate Harvard?
1979.
1979. And so at this point, you were considering medical school.
So no, I came in pre-med, and one of the stories that I like to share is that I got a job at the medical school, a work-study job, because my scholarship did not cover all the costs. And it turns out that my boss at the medical school, when he found out I was from Arkansas, he was from Arkansas, he sort of took me on as a protege. And his name was Dr. Williams. Dr. Williams tried to convince me that immunology was the most amazing thing ever, because he studied tumor immunology.
Okay.
And he was really your typical mad scientist. I'm not making this up. He talked with his hands. His hair was all over the place. He wore those wire-rimmed glasses. But you couldn't help but feel the passion he had for the work that he did. So he gave me a challenge, which was, back then, we didn't really know how cells in the immune system became activated. And so Dr. Williams had a theory that when proteins on the surface of cells became clustered, that was a signal for the cell to become activated. So he challenged me to design a chemical that would cross-link the proteins on cells and then demonstrate that that would cause them to start growing. And, you know, I said, I'm not going to change my major, but that sounds interesting. So I designed a chemical. I got permission to synthesize the chemical.
Wow.
I brought it back to the medical school, sacrificed the mouse, took out the spleen, isolated the cells, added the chemical to the cells, added saline to the controls. And one night, back then, we measured cell division, we still do in some cases, by whether the cells were taking up radioactive precursors of DNA. And so if the cells were getting hot, that you knew that they were dividing. If they didn't, you know they weren't. So I'm standing there looking at the numbers, and the control cells were basically flat. But the cells that got exposed to the chemical I made, the numbers were too high to count. And I sat there thinking to myself, something I designed, something I conceived and carried out had worked. But more importantly, according to Dr. Williams, this had never been done before.
Wow.
So there I am as a 19, 20-year-old. I know something that's never been known before of all the billions of human beings who've ever lived. And until I tell somebody, I'm the only one who knows it. And I can't tell you what an amazing feeling that was to know that you've created new knowledge. And that's when I decided to pursue an MD, PhD.
Wow. Okay.
And that was one of the influences in my life, Dr. Williams, who kind of changed my course a bit.
And I mean, from that story alone, I can just tell that how important mentorship was for you from Dr. Williams, guiding you and pushing you in that direction.
Absolutely, yes.
So shout out to Dr. Williams.
Yes, yes, indeed.
What was one of the hardest challenges that you had matriculating to medical school, and where did you attend medical school?
So I went to Johns Hopkins School of Medicine, and that's an interesting story as well, because back then, Harvard undergraduates had Harvard Medical School senior residents as their advisors and mentors. So my advisor was Dave Moskowitz, just a wonderful white resident, Jewish, from St. Louis, Missouri. And we had lots of talks and conversations, giving me advice. So David asked me to make a list of the medical schools I was going to apply to. And I did. I had 10 schools on my list. And Johns Hopkins was at the very top. And all the other big schools were on there. So Dave came over to the campus, met with me, and I handed him my list. And without saying a word, he took a pen or pencil and crossed out Johns Hopkins. And he saw the look on my face, and he says, "Oh, James, you're a great student. You're going to get into a good medical school, but let's not waste your money, your application fees on this school, because they don't take black students." And so he was right that in the past decade, Johns Hopkins might have had one or at most two black students for the whole 10 years. But a few days later, I got a letter from Baltimore, Maryland, this beautiful gold envelope, Department of Cardiac Surgery, Johns Hopkins School of Medicine. I opened it. "Dear James, congratulations on your success as a student. We'd love to have you come to Johns Hopkins for your medical school training. Signed, Levi Watkins Jr., MD, Associate Professor of Cardiac Surgery." So, as you know, Dr. Watkins was probably the second black faculty member to join the Johns Hopkins faculty.
Yes.
And they made the mistake of putting him on the admissions committee. And Levi started asking questions. Why don't we have more black students? Why don't we admit more black students? Norm Anderson, who was the chair of the admissions committee, would say to him, "We'd love to admit black students, but we can't find any. We can't find any who are qualified." So Levi said, "Well, I'll work on that." And I believe that year, the following year, Levi got the names of all the black students who performed really well in the MCAT. He wrote us all a personal letter. And as I recall, 18 students were admitted, black students, and 14 matriculated. It was a sight to behold, because most of the hospital staff, support staff were all black. They had never seen anyone like them in white coats. So the sense of pride and appreciation that they showed us was amazing. But it just shows you how one person in the right position with the courage to ask questions and do something can change the course of history, and that Levi did that.
Absolutely. He made a significant difference. I'm from Baltimore, Maryland. So, John Hopkins holds a lot of weight in the area and obviously throughout the country and
Yes.
the world. So, how was your experience in Baltimore being there as a young man?
Well, I had just come back from Oxford as a graduate student, and my wife and I, we were expecting our first child. And one of the other experiences that I thought was truly remarkable as I think about it, my daughter Sophia was born on the Friday of the first week of medical school.
Oh, wow.
And I'm in the L&D ward with her, and Dr. Tamal was our OB. He was sitting on the stool. My wife's is there on the stirrup to the legs up and all that. He looks back at me and says, aren't you a medical student? I said, yes, sir. He said, well, he got up, had me sit down.
So you delivered a baby?
I delivered my daughter. So the first hands to touch my daughter were my hands. Right?
Wow.
Now, thankfully, my wife didn't know what was happening. She might have had some concerns. Yeah. But I love the fact that as a 1 week medical student, I had the opportunity to deliver my daughter, Sophia. That was an amazing, and it kind of captured the way things were for me at Hopkins. Just amazing people. When folks got to know you and knew what your story was and what you wanted to do, they were so supportive. Dr. Watkins, Dr. Tamal, Dr. Smoot, and all the others, they were just amazing.
That's awesome. So being with your experience back then in medical school and being entrenched in healthcare today, what advice do you have for underrepresented minorities who want to pursue this path?
Well, first of all, I think people have to understand that getting into medical school, getting into any professional school is challenging, and you have to be prepared. You got to be willing to put the time in. There are many nights I can remember at Harvard as an undergraduate. I'd be up till 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning trying to make sure I got the material. I was going to do well on the organic Chem 20, organic chemistry test, right? So we have to understand there's a lot of work that goes into it, and you got to really want it, right? So one of the pieces of advice I would have for students is to try to get some exposure to medicine and what it involves to make sure it's right for you. And that can be hard for some students. In my case, I wasn't able to shadow a physician or anything like that, but thankfully, what I dreamed about and hoped for turned out to be even better, so it worked out well for me. But I do think it's a great idea for students who think they might want to pursue healthcare, whether it's dentistry, medicine, physician assistant, whatever it might be, to try to get a chance to get exposed to it just to make sure that it's something that resonates well. So I think that's a big part of it, but being committed to do the work and to identify people who can not just be mentors, but advocates. It's one thing to have mentors. You also need people who can advocate for you, who are willing to make calls or intervene on your behalf. And I've been blessed all along the way to have that. And one of the messages I would have for people is sometimes the strongest advocates for you might be people you least expect. In other words, Dr. Williams, Dr. McMichael, my PhD mentor at Oxford, Dr. Tom August, my department chair and postdoc mentor, they're all white men, right? I didn't have any major African-American mentors till I landed at Johns Hopkins. The point I want to make there is that sometimes we have preconceived notion of who should be or could be our mentors and advocates, but we have to have an open mind because there are individuals who may not look like they would be, who will turn out to be some of the strongest advocates you could ask for. So I would just say we should have an open mind about that.
That's very important, and you make a strong point there. Sometimes the people who look like you may not be the ones that are in your corner.
Yes.
So you have to be okay with that, and you have to be okay with reaching out to people who don't look like you.
That's right.
So.
And the other thing is, and I learned this the hard way, when you're an undergraduate and you're aspiring to go to medical school, do something else like that, surround yourself with like-minded colleagues who also are aspiring to do big things, because I think there's a great deal of support and, feeling of success and that you're on the right track when you're surrounded by people who have a like mind. There are a lot of times when students are part of cliques or whatever, they have one aspiration, but the folks in the group may have some other. So I think it's very important to surround yourself with folks who will be truthful, who will tell you what you need to hear, not what you want to hear, who have a like ambitions to yours. That's very important.
Most definitely. So you chose the MD, PhD route. So I know a lot of people might consider that route sometimes, but the drawback to them is the length of time, the length of training. It's a long pathway. How did you stay motivated during that journey?
Well, I guess I've been blessed that every phase of my journey I've enjoyed it, and even I enjoyed high school. I really enjoyed college. The PhD part at Oxford was amazing.
And you were a Rhodes Scholar.
Yes. And so I think as long as you focus on the task in front of you and you try to make the maximum benefit and give it your best and understand that the long-term goal will take care of itself. This is one of the lessons my mother taught me, that if you don't take care of the business at hand, those future opportunities will never be available to you. So make sure you do the thing, be the best high school student you can be the best college student you can be, et cetera. You never lose sight of that long-term goal, but you got to be focused on excelling in what you're doing at the moment. And those successes lead to further successes. So I would say, don't let the end goal, don't lose sight of it, but realize you got to focus on blowing out the thing that's in front of you.
In front of you. Take it one step at a time.
Yes, yes.
So what was your pathway within Hopkins? After you finished medical school, your PhD, did you end up staying in Baltimore or did you go somewhere else?
Yes, so I was at Johns Hopkins for a total of 23 years as a student, a postdoc, faculty member, associate dean. I became the first full professor with tenure in basic sciences and history of the school. And by the time I did that, Hopkins had been around for 125 years. And for most of my time on the faculty, of the several hundred basic science faculty between all the departments, I was the only African American among all of them. And that created a really interesting dynamic, as you might imagine, because Hopkins is in East Baltimore, which is predominantly African American, but most of the people who came to work there every day
Did not look
were
like
not.
a community.
Exactly. So I purposely tried to entrench myself in that community that we were part of, church, Boy Scouts, all those kinds of things. But it was really interesting for me to watch how this amazing institution in the heart of East Baltimore had never really connected with it, right? So that was one of the things. But one of the things that happened, I think that was very significant. I just come back from Oxford having done a PhD, and my focus was on how adhesion molecules controlled immune responses. And so I finished the didactic part of my training. My first rotation was in internal medicine, and one of my first patients was an African American woman in her early 20s. She had just given birth to a baby. They were both HIV positive. And this time there was nothing that could be offered to them except to treat the symptoms and watch them die. My original plan was to become a transplant surgeon because immunology and transplantation go hand in hand. In fact, some of the most major discoveries made in immunology were by people studying transplantation. So I was set to go pursue a career as an immunology researcher who did transplants. But taking care of that young lady and the pediatricians take care of a baby, it kind of occurred to me, and I was advised this was going to be true. Here was one of the most significant problems that immunologists would have to solve. And we kind of had a feeling that minorities would be disproportionately impacted by it. So I gave myself permission to change my plan. And instead of becoming a transplant surgeon, I decided to become an HIV researcher. And it meant a heck of a difference in compensation, but it also made a difference in my fulfillment in my work. And I kind of thought about, transplant surgeons change lives very significantly, one person at a time. But as a researcher, you have the potential to impact hundreds of thousands, if not millions of lives
Yes.
by the work that you do. So with that in mind, I set out on the course to become an HIV researcher, and I would venture to say it turned out okay.
You know, oftentimes making those type of tough decisions on where you want your career to go, it is definitely challenging. Right now, I'm a rising second year. I'm a rising third year, going into my third
Yeah.
year, and we're going to do clinical rotations. So right now in the back of my mind is like, what specialty am I going to go into? And I'm weighing the pros and cons
Yeah.
on those different specialties. So definitely, you know, you considering transplant versus researcher. You have any advice for me?
Well, I think in all these situations, the best choice would be to follow your passion. And that's kind of what I did. I mean, I just loved research, everything about it, you know, posing the right questions and designing experiments to answer those questions. This whole idea of creating new knowledge. And you know, I have 11 patents, maybe 13 patents. One of them turned into a FDA-approved drug to treat severe psoriasis. And it was licensed by Genentech. They actually made a drug called Raptiva. One of the things that really impacted me was getting an email that was forwarded to me of this black woman sitting on the beach for the first time in, she said, maybe 20 years. And it was all because the drug she had taken cleared up her
Skin condition.
And that was a really amazing feeling to think that you changed lives through the research you did that turned into an actual drug. I mean, it's not like curing cancer or you know, whatever, but it was really an amazing feeling to know that through the work I did in my basic research, it turned into a drug that could change lives like that.
Very impactful and it's scalable.
Absolutely.
So that makes sense. So you were at Hopkins for 23 years. So when did you make the change and the switch to Meharry? How did you get to Meharry?
So it was like one spring day in 2004. I remember standing on my deck, sitting on the deck reading a paper, and I got a phone call. I answered. It was David Grandison calling from Meharry Medical College. He was leading a search for the founding director of the HIV Center at Meharry. So Meharry had gotten a large grant in two phases. One was a planning grant. The other one was the bulk of the funding once a director was identified to launch this new center.
Okay.
So being Meharry, they wanted the director to be African American. And to be honest, there was only two of us who achieved the kind of stature that NIH was looking for. I assume the other guy said no, because then they called me. But I don't know that to be a fact. So we had a really nice conversation, but by that time I had 2 RO1s. The lab was doing really great. My students were thriving.
What are RO1s?
RO1s are individual grants from NIH to establish major research programs. They're kind of like the now you've made it kind of thing. Once you get an RO1, you can consider to be a well-established scientist. And I was happy in Baltimore at Hopkins. Everything was going well. So I politely declined Dr. Grandison's offer. We had the exact same conversation about a month later.
Okay.
And again, by then I had done some more research to know what Meharry was about. But I still felt that my opportunities at Hopkins were significant enough to keep me there. And nobody would admit to this, but I think they did something really sneaky. They called my wife. My wife convinced me that maybe with our son about to become a teenager, Jay was about 10 years old at the time, and Baltimore was not a great place, as you probably know, to raise a son necessarily back in those days. So my wife's rationale was, let's just go have a look. So we did. And I came here in December of 2004. It actually changed my life. Wow. I'd never been to a place where, from students, staff, faculty, leadership, also committed to this idea that actually got me started. This idea of health equity and making sure anyone who needed healthcare could get it and all that. So I was really moved by that, but I was actually also moved by having students in such large numbers who had bought into that vision. In fact, my meetings with the students put it over the top for me, right? So I get back to Baltimore, and I'm not making this up. I sang in the male chorus, and I'm sitting in the choir stand right next to the pulpit. My chair happens to be right next to the pulpit. Okay, we finished the shamanic selection that we did. Pastor Green stands up. He reads the scripture about Christ walking out on the water and asking the disciples to join him. Right? He looks at me. Now, mind you, I haven't said a word to anybody except my wife about this decision I'm trying to make.
Yeah.
And he says, my topic today is, it's time to get out of the boat.
Uh-oh.
I actually literally had chills, right? Hopkins was the boat, and dude, it's time for you
To go.
to go, right?
Yeah.
So I actually, and it was actually Martin Luther King's birthday, his actual birthday.
Wow.
This was happening. So I thought to myself, could it be more clear what God is trying to tell you? So after that, I was overcome by this feeling, I have to do this. I had some trepidations about it, but I really felt that all things that converged to make it clear that Meharry's where you need to be. So probably a couple of days later, I turned in my resignation letter to Hopkins, and we started making arrangements to come to Meharry on July 1st of 2005.
2005.
I joined Meharry.
Wow. So I'm assuming since coming here since 2005, a lot has changed, like in Nashville and with Meharry.
Yes.
What excites you the most about being the leader and leading a medical school in today's healthcare climate?
So first of all, imagine what it must feel like to be somebody who started their journey because you felt that your father didn't get the care he needed because he's black and we were poor. To be leading an organization that was created to make sure that doesn't happen.
Full circle.
Talk about coming full circle. And I'm always reminded of that whenever I starting feeling sorry for myself or things aren't going the way that I think they should go. I just remind myself that maybe this is what God purposed for my life all along. All those things I did between leaving Camden and ending up here. But there's no other institution in the country that has the story that Meharry has to tell. How we were created, why we were created, all the things that we've survived, all the lives that have been touched, all the communities now being served by Meharry physicians, dentists, and it's just an amazing thing. And I just hope that I'm doing justice to this great legacy that I've been charged with, and that's the thing that drives me.
That's awesome. If you had to pick 3 things that you enjoy or love the most about Meharry, what are they?
Well, first, I love the students. That's why I came back. Because, I was here for 6 years. I left, went to the University of California as a dean there. And when the opportunity to come back arose, I jumped on it because I think of it as touching the future. If I can play a small part in getting the students ready to go out and change the world, then that means I get a chance to touch the future. That makes me very excited. So I love the fact that I get to be a small part of getting young people ready to go out and do amazing things. I also love our mission, because again, that's why I came back here, in addition to the students, of making sure that no matter who you are, we can offer you the best that medicine has to offer, or dentistry, or whatever. And then the third thing, I have a chance to finally get Meharry the recognition that is so long deserved, right? I mean, one of the things I was determined to do was to make sure Meharry's story got told.
Yes.
And the pandemic was the perfect opportunity for me to do that. So as you know, when the pandemic happened, the fact that I'm an infectious disease researcher and the president of Meharry, those 2 things converged to create some opportunities for me to tell our amazing stories, to elevate our profile nationally and locally. In fact, before the pandemic happened, there were a whole bunch of people in Nashville who didn't know there were two medical schools, separated only by a few years. We've been around almost as long as Vanderbilt has been. And so the pandemic gave me a chance to tell our story in a way that has never been told before. Because again, in the pantheon of medical institutions in the United States, without fear of contradiction, we are unique.
Yes.
We're unique, we always have been, and one of my goals and one of my determinations is to make sure the whole world knows that.
Yes. So a part of Meharry's legacy is the story of Samuel Meharry and the salt wagon. What inspires you about that story?
Well, here you have a 16-year-old white boy driving a wagon in the backwoods of Kentucky or Tennessee. He develops wagon problems. The wagon slides off the road, gets stuck, and as I understand it, he sees a modest little cabin in the distance. He knocks on the door, greeted by a black family. Now, in 1826, in the Deep South, if you're a black family, you may not be so willing to engage a young white man.
Right.
Not only did they engage him, they gave him a place to sleep, fed him, helped him get on his way. And as a young Christian, part of an abolitionist family, he made a remarkable promise. I don't have anything, but if I ever do, I'm going to do something for your people. Now, fast forward 50 years, this man who made a promise as a teenager keeps a promise 50 years later. That's remarkable in and of itself, right? So there's so many things about that story that are remarkable, but the other thing is, being a Christian, the money was given through the church to start a department, medical department, at an HBCU. Central Tennessee College was an HBCU, one of the first. We were born in the church. We were reared in the church. We're still affiliated with the church. And I love coming to a place where I can bring my whole person to work every day. I couldn't do that in California. I couldn't talk about my Christian faith. I couldn't listen to my gospel music in my office like I do now. I mean, it's just wonderful for me to be at a place where I can bring my whole person to work every day,
Right.
and be surrounded by people who look like me, who have the same values as me. It's just a remarkable thing.
What advice do you have for a student or someone who is interested in pursuing higher education leadership, like a role like yours?
Well, I have to confess that I didn't set out, honestly, to be a leader in academics. And to be honest with you, when I just got promoted to associate professor, our dean at the time, Mike Johns, decided to start an internal leadership training program where Hopkins would train its own leaders, right? So what the dean did was he asked every department chair to identify a mid-level person in that department to be a part of this leadership program. And Dr. August, for whatever reason, identified me to be a part of it. I didn't want to do it. I mean, I had grants to write and all this. The first 2 times there were suggestions. The third time, it's, you will do this.
Uh-oh.
We have to send somebody from the department. You're the best choice for us. And after about the 3rd session, I really did understand that leadership does matter. And that if you are a leader with the right temperament and vision, you could actually improve the lives of either your students, your patients, whatever. And so I kind of had a different thought about leadership. And shortly thereafter, I became the first associate dean for graduate studies in the history of Johns Hopkins Medical School.
Wow.
They never had one before. And maybe that was their plan all along, was to have me do that. But one of the things I would have to say is that if you are aspiring to be a leader, you need to put yourself in situations where you can observe leaders and how they do this, but also know there needs to be something that you can claim that you know, if not better than anybody else, as well as anybody else. In other words, there has to be something you can you can claim as being a real strength for yourself. And in higher education in medicine, of course, that could be research, that could be administration, purely administration, that could be clinical, but there needs to be a core strength you have to bring to the table. But the other thing I think is really important is being able to communicate. If your communication skills are good and you have those core strengths I've been talking about, then I think leadership is something that will avail itself to you.
That's a good advice right there. Speaking of communicate, you have your own podcast called The Public Service Announcement, where you interview different healthcare professionals who are leaders as well. What is one takeaway that you've gathered from all the interviews that you've done from those talks? What's one takeaway?
One of the things I have come to understand, I've spoken with, for example, Senator Bill Frist, who was a senator, overseeing large budgets of the committees he's on. I've spoken to David Dill, who's the CEO of LifePoint, which is a for-profit healthcare organization. I've talked to Dr. Moses, who's one of Meharry's icons, been around for 60 plus years. But one of the things that struck me is that in all of these interviews, there's a common thread of people having to deal with and overcome challenges, right? And how those challenges changed their perspectives, but also made them stronger in what they were doing. And that's why I say that I view challenges as an opportunity to become stronger and to be more efficient and effective in solving problems going forward. I have 8 vice presidents who report to me, and when I first met with them back to almost 10 years ago, I introduced something called the Wisdom Circle. And what that means is sitting around the table at the time was 330 years of collective experience as professionals. Challenges overcome, victories and successes, lessons learned from it. And my thought was, for every major challenge that Meharry faces, I want all of you, it may be a problem in the medical school, but I want all of us to think about how we solve that. Because some of the battles we fight in medicine, dentistry, research, they have common themes to them, right? And sometimes a person who's not immersed in the problem will bring an insight to it that may have never occurred to the rest of us. So that's one of the things that has come very clear in my conversation on the podcast is how no matter what your field or your profession or what level of success you've achieved, there's been some challenge to overcome that made you stronger and better at what you do. And so I've tried to incorporate that into how I lead the college.
That's awesome. Speaking of challenges, during the time of the pandemic, you had talked about this a little bit earlier before about how Meharry played an instrumental role in combating that and providing vaccinations and screenings for the local population here in Nashville. What does servant leadership mean to you?
It's sort of like realizing that if you view the program or organization as you lead as a triangle, that actually the point of the triangle is pointing down, and that's where you are. That your job is to facilitate the success of all the people above you. I mean, some leaders think that all the other people in the organization are below you, but in servant leadership, it's just the opposite. Your role is to work for the success of everyone else in the organization, because if they're successful, the organization as a whole will be successful. And that's how I view my role at Meharry, which is, you always hear me say I'm the chief cheerleader. And that's where that perspective comes from, that I'm here to serve the needs of the students, to serve the needs of the faculty, to serve the needs of the staff, and very importantly, our patients. I'm at the bottom of the triangle, not sitting at the top. To me, it's the inversion of that. That's what servant leadership means to me.
That's awesome. Do you have any exciting news for Meharry or anything that you want to talk about for this Meharry, like in the future?
Well, we've launched a capital campaign to raise $500 million. I'm really excited that we're at $380 million, including a $175 million gift from Michael Bloomberg, which is the largest gift in Meharry's history, but That's part of a $600 million gift to all 4 black medical schools, and that's a truly remarkable thing. But I'm hoping that that investment in us will signal to other people that the organizations that we lead are worthwhile for investments, because I do believe sincerely that the impact that we're having as an organization is tremendous. And dollar for dollar, the impact that we've had as an organization compared to, say, Vanderbilt, I don't think it is even close. In terms of the resources we've had, the impact that we've had, the ratio is just, I don't think, immeasurable.
That's awesome.
So, and the other thing is, we have 5 schools now instead of the 3 when we started. The data science is going great. Global health is very exciting. We're going to turn out people into the world with an amazing toolkit, because we were going to start a school of public health, but we realized that that was too prescriptive for achieving health equity. So we need policy experts, epidemiologists, biostatisticians. We need a convergence of multiple disciplines to attack a problem that big. And that's why this new school is so exciting.
That's awesome.
So I think, there are a lot of exciting things happening, but I still believe the best is yet to come.
Yes. Any parting words or advice you want to give to students, faculty, anyone that's listening in on this podcast?
I think this has probably been said over and over, way in the past, but there's never been a more exciting time to be a healthcare professional. The problems that can be solved, the communities that can be reached, and technology has leveled the playing field so that we, as an organization, if we put together the right programs and the right people, can have as much impact as any other organization. So I think that if we embrace technology in the right way, including artificial intelligence, the discoveries that will be made and the impacts to be had are just unimaginable. And I just can't wait to see what you all are going to do when you're all fully trained and out there in the world. It's going to be amazing to watch.
For sure. Thank you so much, President Hildreth, for coming on to Mission in Medicine. This was an amazing podcast, very insightful. I hope you all enjoyed this conversation between him and I. And where can they find you, on social media or?
I'm not too hard to find, but yeah, the podcast is now being offered on all those sites where podcasts are being offered. I don't know much about that, honestly.
You can find his podcast.
You young people are taking care of that for me.
His podcast is Public Service Announcement. You can find it on Spotify, all the different channels, and stream it as well. So thank you so much again.
Thank you for having me.
No problem. How do you feel?
Awesome.
It's good. Thank you, guys.